Recording.
Well, welcome to you all for another session of our Black History Lunchtime conversations. It's really been an epic, this 32, 33, 34, I've lost count now, sessions. We've just had an opportunity to greet the team of people who are with us live today. But if you're watching this on a recording, we would love to get comments and feedback from you, because we think it's really valuable to record the sessions, because we've had some fantastic speakers telling us stories that we didn't know before, or expanding on stories. So welcome to everybody today, but special welcome to Professor Lucy Bland from Anglia Ruskin University, Cambridge, with a fascinating story about the Second World War, the story of Britain's brown babies. And Lucy's written a book about this story and is going to tell us about it now. Thanks very much then, Lucy, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, so from 2013 to 2018, I researched the lives of the children born to British women and Black US servicemen, children, they're now in their 70s, of course, and I traveled around the country to interview them. And this led to a book, Britain's Brown Babies, which was published in May 2019. And it's just won a prize, but anyway, Social History Society prize, which is great. Now, brown babies, you might be wondering about this term. This was the term given at the time by the African-American press to the children of Black GIs and white women. Now, oral history, the interviews are at the heart of this book. So they're personal memories of growing up in the late 40s and 1950s as a mixed-race child in what was then a very white Britain. And in the book, the interviews are combined with analysis of official records of central and local government, various organizations, reports from children's homes, newspapers, British and American, letters and memoirs. So how did I hear about these children? Well, I first heard about them when in October 2011, I watched the second episode of a three-part BBC series, Mixed Britannia, which was a history of mixed-race people in Britain through the 20th century. And if you want to see it, the three parts are on YouTube, in fact. And it opens with the presenter, George Alagaya, going off to meet his brother-in-law, married to his sister, Tony Martin, who was a mixed-race GI baby. And also in the program was another war baby, Brian Lawrenson. Both had been fathered by Black American servicemen and given up by their mothers. But while Tony had been happily fostered, Brian had remained in Liverpool children's homes until he was 14. Now, just if you hadn't recognized this wonderful picture, Tony Martin at Dr. Bernardo Children's Home, he is on his trike passing Princess Margaret without even realizing it's, you know, he doesn't care who this woman is with these flowers. I think it's brilliant. At the time, I was working on a book in the 1920s. This is when I saw the program. So I resolved I would return to the topic of these children at a later date. So in 2013, I went back to the subject and discovered that very little had been written about them. So what drew me to this research? Well, this appeared to be a history that was very largely unknown. Histories of the British experience of the Second World War are extensive, but they rarely feature these war babies. Further, although everyone knows about the arrival of the Empire Windrush in 1948, it's generally assumed to be the starting point for the growth of a post-war Black British population. But at least 2,000 mixed-race GI babies were born in Britain a few years prior to Windrush's arrival. Now, this may sound a small number, but if we take into account that the pre-war Black British population was an estimated 7,000 to 10,000, really quite tiny, these children represented a not insignificant 20 to 28% increase in numbers of people of colour over a couple of years. Another reason why I was drawn to the study of these wartime babies is more personal. I mean, I would suggest that many historians and probably researchers in other fields often work on subjects that resonate in some way with something in their own lives. So my father's second wife, after my mother, was Guyanese, and I had a black stepsister as well, her daughter from her first marriage. My nephew has mixed race children. My partner and I have an adopted Guatemalan daughter. And I say all this to indicate why I, a white woman, am so interested in mixed raceness. It's part of my own family, as may well be the case for many 21st century families. Now, during the Second World War, over the period 1942 to 45, 3 million GIs is just the term given for American servicemen, passed through Britain, although never that number at any one time. The American troops, as you know, were largely there to aid the liberation of Western Europe, and they were based all over the country, but in greatest concentration in South and the Southwest England, South Wales, East Anglia on the east, and Lancashire. Approximately 8% of these troops were African American, so in the region of 240,000. It was a segregated army, stayed segregated until 1948, and to address interracial tension amongst its servicemen, which they believed was largely due to white GIs' hostility towards relations between black men and white women, the US Army authorities introduced segregation of leisure pursuits. Now, although Britain was formally opposed to US military segregation, it didn't interfere with these arrangements. So access to towns near to American bases were given on different days for blacks and whites, while other towns were permanently designated whites only or blacks only for the whole war. In many villages, pubs too were segregated along colour lines, and dances were held for black GIs one evening, whites the next. Pubs and dances were the main sites where local women met black GIs. Now, while the British population were largely in favour of the black GIs, certainly initially, finding them far politer and more modest than their white counterparts, who were seen as boastful and bumptious, they were generally not so keen on relationships between black Americans and local women. So while most Britons were committed to being kind of friendly, polite, and welcoming, many, particularly British men and older generation of both sexes, drew the line at sexual relations. Young women, however, often found the black GIs very attractive. In addition to the black GIs having better manners, part of the attraction was unfamiliarity, the vast majority of British people never having met a black person before. But I think the attraction also related to the association of black American culture with new forms of dance and cutting-edge modern music. As the African American magazine Ebony observed in 1946, the average Negro GI had one advantage over his white army brother. He knew how to jitterbug. English girls loved to dance. And this was true in this period. The two main leisure pursuits of young British women were dancing and going to the pictures, which was the term for the cinema, the movies. Now, if British women in relations to black GIs went on to have a child, they faced a barrage of criticism. As I've said, an estimated 2,000 mixed race offspring were born of such relationships to both single and married women. And they were very largely born in areas close to where the black GIs were sited, which were not usually large towns, Liverpool aside. Unlike the white GIs, black GIs in this segregated army were generally forbidden by their commanding officers to marry. So all the troops had to get permission from their commanding officers to marry. All the commanding officers, well, most of them were white, and it was invariably forbidden to the black GIs. And the rationale, if one was asked for, was that 30 out of the then 48 US states had anti-miscegenation laws, that, forbidding marriage between blacks and whites. Nearly half of the mothers of these babies, faced with the stigma of illegitimacy and of having a mixed-race child, placed their babies in children's homes. However, few of these children were adopted, as adoption societies wouldn't take a half-caste, this was the pejorative term of the time, onto their books, deeming them too hard to place. So I just want to give you a brief sense of some of the stories. I'm not going to talk hugely about everybody, but I'm just going to start with Babs Gibson Ward. Everyone has given me permission, of course, to give their names, etc. Now, Babs was born in October 44 in Ipswich in Suffolk, and her father worked in the US Air Force's Engineer Battalion and was based in East Anglia for up to 18 months. Indeed, the black GIs built the 70 air bases that were all over East Anglia, because of course this was directly opposite Europe. Yet in Britain, they were never allowed to fly the planes or indeed bear arms. When Babs was born, her married mother was able to pass her off as her husband's because Babs initially had light skin. Presumably the dates of his leave had roughly fitted. She had light skin, but after 6 months, she darkened and she was sent to a Dr. Bernardo's home. So of this photograph, Babs comments, I think the only way that I can describe the look on my face is one of surliness and mistrust. Well, not surprisingly. She was there till she was 4 and then she was fostered. So Babs's new brothers and sisters were nice to her, as initially were her foster parents, but she was subjected to racism in the neighbourhood in Suffolk and in her school. Quote, I'd never seen anyone that looked like me in the area. And sometimes when I wanted to play outside with other children, their parents wouldn't let them play with me. And the kids would tell me, my dad says I'm not to play with you. This was a familiar story for many of the brown babies. Now, I'm using this term because actually many of the people are happy to have this term to describe themselves. The school was particularly awful. Quote, there was a teacher in the school. He was obviously very racist and I hated this school. And one day he sat me at the back of the classroom and he gave me a box of jigsaw pieces to play with and turned around and announced to the rest of the children I didn't have the same ability to learn. And so all I knew was to play while they could be taught. I was about 6 or 7. Then there was a geography class and the children had to put together, it's like a plasticine model of a desert island scene, which they made out of pipe cleaners and palm trees and created climbers who were climbing for coconuts. And he turned around and he said to the children, when it was time to have a classroom break, they should go out and they should ask me to show them how to climb a pole like a monkey. I was quite angry with him then. I just said to them, I'm not coming back to this school again. So British schools' underestimation of Black children's intelligence continues to this day, unfortunately. And I know, ironically, Babs is a hugely intelligent. She's a member of Mensa, which is people with a high intelligence. Not all was well at Babs's foster home either. She remembers always being hungry and losing weight. She was not fed properly and ate other children's leftovers at school. Yet her foster parents were paid well by Dr. Bernardo's in the fostering. And in fact, those that fostered so-called coloured, including, mixed race kids, were paid more because they were hard to place. Then there was the foster father, quote, he used to make a fuss of me. But when I was 10, there came an occasion when I was sitting on his lap and he attempted to molest me. Now, it was very probably more than simply an attempt. Because one day at school, a child slapped her playfully on the backside and it hurt much more than it should have. A doctor examined her and discovered an abscess, quote, it was a Bartholin's abscess, and gonorrhea is the most likely organism responsible for that. Babs can't remember her foster father actually abusing her, but her abscess points to it, and she later found out that he had certainly sexually abused his birth children. Aged 10, Babs was taken away from her foster home and went back to Bernardo's. Years later, she found out she'd been taken away because, quote, when the social worker came to visit the house, they found me on my own. I think with retrospect, it was probably the good thing I was taken away when I was because of the behaviour of my father. Now, of the children kept by mothers or grandmothers, quite often grandmothers looked after the children. Slightly, and now I said it's slightly over half of the people I've interviewed, or people who contacted me subsequently, because since the book, lots of other people have contacted me. I'm just going to mention two. I'm going to mention John Stokely and Arlene Nelson. Now, John was born in May 1945 in Weymouth in Dorset. His mother was married. Her husband came back in 1946 to find John. His mother was kept a virtual prisoner in her house. Quote, well, he punished my mum to the day she died. He punished her for what she did. She wasn't allowed out. I look back now and I think she was allowed to go shopping just from 10 to 12 on a Thursday, and that was it. And he punished me, racist, nasty man. When Cassius Clay was on, because I was an amateur boxer, he was a great hero of mine, hated him, hated anything black, hated musicians, Nat King Cole, and he was violent. So John left school at 15 and started working for his stepdad on his heights and weights machine on Weymouth seafront. But he soon left as it was unbearable. And I think this photograph, sorry, it's a bit dark, but if you can see, it sort of illustrates their antagonistic relationship. His stepfather was a compulsive gambler and what John calls a serial philanderer. Quote, he'd win money, he'd blow it, because the more you win, the bigger the bet that goes on. She didn't leave him. Divorce was a terrible thing then. They didn't do it, did they? John suggests that people didn't divorce in the 40s and early 50s, but that was not the case for Arlene Nelson's mother. Her mother was already married with 2 children when Arlene was born in Mottram, Lancashire, in October 1943. But the mother soon divorced, remarried when Arlene was 12. Of the stepfather, you can see in the middle, he didn't like me a bit. I was a thorn in his flesh. Nevertheless, Arlene had a happy childhood, quote, I was a pet of the village, never ostracized, although there was name calling. Arlene remembers saying, Mum, they're calling me Blackie. And she would say, well, go and call them Whitey. Doesn't have the same ring, does it? There were a few teachers who well-meaningly tried to combat racism, so this is a bit different from Babs' school, misread the situation. Arlene relates the story of a new relief teacher for her class when she was about 8. Quote, there was a boy called David who had the most awful stammer. He couldn't get the words out at all, and he was asked to sit with me. And he said, no, I don't want to. And his teacher, I can still feel the embarrassment. He brought me out to the front and sat on a desk and sat me on the desk and held my hands in both of his and gave them a lecture on difference. And the fact that because I was a different colour, it shouldn't make any difference. And I can still smell the tweed of his jacket. And he smoked cigars. And when I get that smell, I'm right back in that classroom. And poor David sat there trying to get it out. And eventually said, I don't know what you're talking about. I just don't want to sit with a girl. That was rather sweet. The only person I've interviewed for my book who was adopted by his father in the States was Leon Lomax. And I'm going to go back to his story in a moment, but I just want to say something about this question about sending the children to the States or not. From their birth onwards, government officials and others in authority debated whether it was desirable for the brown babies to remain in Britain or to be sent to the USA. And I think this kind of echoes of the cases of children being sent by the British government and by other children's homes to Australia and Canada in the 19th and indeed in the 20th century. One person who was keen to get the children sent to the US was the Somerset Superintendent Health Visitor, Celia Bangham. During the war, Somerset County Council had established a temporary residential children's home, residential nursery, largely devoted to the care of the county's brown babies, Honeycott House. Now, interesting, I've interviewed some of these children. I can't talk about this now, it's not time, but 4 of them I've interviewed in both these pictures. It's great. Celia Bangham wanted to find homes for these children, but faced with the reluctance of British adoption societies to take them on their books, she hoped for their adoption by their putative fathers, near relatives, or other so-called colour families in the US. There were, in fact, many Black Americans willing to adopt them. So in December 1945, the war is now over, of course, the Labour Home Secretary, who was called James Shooter Eade, he met with Celia Bangham and with an MP for Taunton in Somerset to discuss the US adoption policy. Shooter Eade was unenthusiastic. He said, he also said that it was against the British law, the Adoption Act of 39, where children were only allowed to be sent abroad to live with British subjects or with their relatives. Now, African-American couples who came forward to adopt were thus excluded. And since they were only deemed putative fathers, because DNA testing for paternity didn't come into at least the late 1960s, the Black fathers weren't considered to be relatives. However, by November 1947, so 2 years later, the British government had made, changed its mind. It made what was referred to as an Anglo-American agreement. A child would be permitted to travel to its putative father or the father's relatives in the US, dependent on the arrangements being what they called in the best interest of the child. Now, of course, what the best interest of the child might be at any point in time depends, on dominant ideas, like circumstances, who's got the power to make those decisions. According to the Foreign Office, the policy was to apply to coloured children only, since white children were an entirely different problem. Now, in what way they were an entirely different problem wasn't spelled out, but no doubt referred both to the greater ease in getting white children adopted in Britain, and there was a huge number being adopted in Britain, and to the lesser likelihood that white American fathers would want to adopt their own children, since unlike the Black GIs, they'd had the possibility of marrying the child's mother, if both of them were free to. However, the Home Office became worried about this overt exclusion of white children. They said there was the need to avoid any suggestion that we in this country are trying to get rid of the coloured waifs left behind by the American occupation. Quite interesting, they're calling them coloured occupation. And yet getting rid of the coloured waifs appears to be precisely what they were intending. So in 1948, a few US adoptions do happen, just a few, but on the following year, there's another about-face in Home Office policy. It refuses to amend the Children's Act of 48, which has incorporated these regulations about prohibiting adoption overseas by non-relatives. And the official explanations given, any implication there's not a place in this country for coloured children who have not had a normal life would cause controversy and give offence in some quarters. Now, you know, I'm not entirely sure why they changed their mind again. I mean, there was pressure on them by a couple of black groups in Britain, the League of Coloured Peoples, which was a civil rights group, and the Pan-African Federation. But also significant was the passing of the 1948 British Nationality Act. So citizenship was being granted to citizens of British colonies and former colonies, giving them the right to come to Britain and stay indefinitely. Supposedly the right, we know where that went. While the government, you know, so while the government was clearly ambivalent about the arrival of many West Indians in June 1948 on the Empire Windrush, when they debate the British Nationality Act the following month, Shooter E, the Home Secretary, pronounced, "We recognise the right of colonial peoples to be treated as men and brothers with the people of this country." So how could he then effectively deport the brown babies who, as the children of British mothers born in Britain, had automatic British nationality as they then did? Okay, so one father who was successful in getting his child over to the US was Leon Lomax. Corporal Lomax, an African-American soldier, arrived back in Ohio at the end of the war. He'd been stationed in England for much of his time away. The baby had been born in December 45 and was given the same name as his father. Leon Jr. was put into a children's home in East Anglia by his single mother. And with great difficulty, Leon Sr. eventually managed to have his son flown out to the US, arriving in January 49. So I think, you know, I thought this is before the embargo. In the Pittsburgh Courier was a leading African-American newspaper. And I think they invented the term brown babies. The Pittsburgh Courier called his arrival the story of the year, the first brown baby to arrive. I mean, lots more come from Germany later. Given the 1949 shift in policy for the mixed-race GI children, I had assumed that in the early 50s, there would not have been any more British brown babies adopted in the States. However, just after my book was published, I heard of another case of a US adoption, this time in 1950. I was contacted by Aaron Barty, the son of James Barty, who had been born in December 45, the same year as Leon, same month as Leon, in Dorset to a young single woman, May, and a black GI called Edward Barty. Edward's mother in the States kept in touch with May and learnt that she was finding it hard to look after James. In 1950, James was adopted by the man he was told was his American father, Norman. So Aaron, James's son, writes to me, he's in the States. It was a difficult situation for James's mother, May, but one she understood was probably best for James. As a white mother, raising a black child, she had to hide James from public attention. And as a single mother, she also couldn't provide what she wanted for him. So at the age of 4, she put him on a plane to America, telling him only that he was going to live with his father. The reality was that he was sent to live with his uncle Norman, a family secret that my father did not discover till he was in his 30s. Norman was in fact Edward's brother, but he and his wife were unable to have their own biological children and decided to take James and pretend he was Norman's biological son. Edward already had his own children. Norman was in the military. At the base in Georgia, James, quote, was taught about racism the hard way, even being beat up by the black kids for pretending to be white due to his British accent. This case indicates that there may well have been other cases of adoption from Britain to the US despite the 1949 ruling. It's possible that the ruling was less rigid than I had assumed. Now, these stories give you a tiny taster of many of the narratives in the book and up on this online exhibition, because since I wrote the book last September, really during lockdown, I thought I had a physical exhibition going around the country, and I thought really it would be good to have the stories up on online. And a friend of mine who runs the Mixed Museum, which is about mixed race people in Britain, she said, well, let's put an exhibition. So we put this exhibition together, and then more and more people have contacted me. So I've put more and more stories up there, which it's brilliant that I'm still being contacted about it. So just to say some of the key findings of the research include the realization of some of the difficulties faced by these children. Illegitimacy, because I mean, it's hard for us today to appreciate how really until the 1970s, to be illegitimate was a huge taboo. You know, and being called a black bastard, that was one of the things they were called. And bastard actually meaning illegitimate, not just a nice word. And for those placed in homes, little likelihood of adoption. For nearly all the children, an extreme sense of difference, isolation, the experience of racism, lack of role models, and of a sense of belonging, especially given that the vast majority of them were growing up in predominantly white geographical areas. The ambivalence of the British government as to whether the brown baby should stay in the UK or go to the US demonstrates how these children were not thought to belong fully to their country of birth. Not having a sense of truly belonging in Britain has dogged many of them through their lives. Their presence has been continually questioned, and thereby their right to be British and their right of abode. So Monica Roberts, for example, she said she cannot forget the horror of this question. Where are you from? You're not from our country. You're not one of us. You weren't born here. I remember having a row with a girl in the street when I was about 13. She said, you should go home. You're not one of us. Although many people from the Caribbean started to arrive in Britain in the late 40s and 50s, they were generally based in large towns and cities, not small towns and villages where many of these mixed-race GI war babies grew up. And if and when these war babies met them, they were not necessarily accepted, seen as not black enough and not West Indian. These brown babies also had a strong desire to find their origins, given that they had little knowledge as children of their fathers. And incidentally, their mothers and grandmothers often would lie to them as well. I mean, children's homes would say your father's dead, your mother doesn't want you. I mean, terrible things they said. But the mothers and grandmothers, because they felt they had to move on, they often said, oh, your father died in the war, and oh, I can't remember his name. I mean, it's extraordinary. So many of them just, you know, didn't even know the name. They've often gained a greater sense of self-worth and racial pride if and when they found birth fathers or US relatives. But finding fathers has been extremely difficult. I haven't got the space to talk about this here, other than to say that they were frequently lied to and blocked to by the US military for many years. But with widespread DNA tests all becoming easier, but of course fathers are generally long dead, they'd be well into their 90s. Researchers' disseminations help integrate a sense of agency, community, and a shared history. At the launch of my book in June 2019, there were over 160 people present, including many of my interviewees and their families. 2 participants gave speeches about what their involvement in the book meant to them. So Arlene declared, it was a tonic for me to talk to someone who really wanted to know about me and how my life had been. Because many of them hadn't told anyone about their backgrounds at all. Eugene summed up the main effects of the book on his life: catharsis, tears, healing, and empowerment. At this launch, they got to meet each other and formed a private Facebook group called Britain's Brown Babies. Membership of this group is growing. It's a forum for sharing stories, photographs, meeting each other in a seat, well, online at least, and seen by participants as hugely valuable. Terry, for example, remarked, it's so comforting to know that we all share very similar experiences, which until now we couldn't express. I'm sure most of us felt alone in that anguish in those early days. So finally, to say that this history is part of a wider history of the many mixed-race GI babies born to women across Europe and the Pacific during and after the war. For too long, their stories have not been widely known. Now that Black Lives Matter has so importantly set in train a huge desire to explore and expand on Black British history, a study such as this one is a small contribution, I hope, to what is an ever-growing body of much needed research. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now, shall I? Sorry if I went on a bit long. It's just so much stuff.
Not at all, Lucy. That was absolutely fascinating. I think we could have happily let you go on far longer, but that's a good reason why we need to read the book.
Look at the online thing as well, because a lot of it's there.
Yes. I found you through the Mixed Museum because I was doing some searching around trying to find links with Ireland.
Yeah.
And I think it's 2 Irish people who are certainly much involved with the I can't remember what it's called, mixed.
AMRI. It's Association of Mixed Race Irish. So they exhibition which they work with AMRI. So if you go to that site, Mixed Museum, they first of all have a general exhibition, then they have one, the Amory, and then below, if you scroll down, they have the Brown Babies one, which has got all these panels, and you click on the panels and open up, and there's lots and lots of stuff.
Yes, it's beautifully presented, and that was fascinating. That it was a bit of a roundabout way that I heard of this, and I was particularly intrigued because I was born in '49 and moved to a little village in Worcestershire in 1955, and there were stories about the American camps, the black camp and the white camp. But I've tried to find out if there are any records of Blakedown in Kidderminster, Worcestershire, but I've not been able to find out anything. And certainly the local historical societies sound, well, I've not got through to them yet, but it's certainly not a history of the village that's been shared. So absolutely fascinating, Lucy. I had an opportunity to talk with you when we were planning this. Caroline.
Yeah. Lucy, my mother worked for Dr. Bernardo. She was a Bernardo's nurse before I was born in the early 50s. So I've grown up with stories of the children, all the wonderful things that went on there. And she told me that there were a lot of GI babies there, a lot of mixed race children, and they were very difficult to place, you know, for adoption and so on. So they stayed there till they were older than a lot of the white children.
Yeah, in my book, I've got quite a few who went to Dr. Bernardo's.
I've just been reading the section on the museum page, the website. I looked that up. It seems that some of them had very bad experiences, but the homes that my mother worked at, they seemed to, well, her memories were very good. Some of the staff weren't treated well, but the children were.
I think they've treated, it varies hugely, probably from home to home. It really depends on who's working there, doesn't it? Because some of the stories I've had, I mean, the nurseries they went to, like the Honeycott House one that I showed you, they were lovely. They were young nurseries, very loving and whatever. And they felt, you know, they felt like a community. But some of the others, there were some pretty horrendous stories. Not particularly Dr. Bernardo's, just, you know, the Waifs and Strays and Church of England Children's Society. I mean, one of the people I interviewed, David Martins, I mean, a lot of sadistic abuse. I think it really varied from the place. So
my mother has still kept in contact with some of the children that she was the nursery nurse to. Yeah, that she had in her care when they were babies. Yeah.
So Caroline, where was that? Where was that home?
I'm trying to remember, and you'd probably ask me, but Hampshire. My father was in the RAF. He did his 2 years national service, and they actually met at a New Year's Eve dance when she was working at Dr. Bernardo's in her second year.
Oh wow! And when was that?
About 1954.
Okay. Oh, that's.
They married in 55, and I was born 56.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
There are lots of GI babies.
I'll have to ask her the name of the home. I'm trying to remember it. I know that she went to the village, the main village, to do some of her training, where they all lived in the little houses. And I have been to the place where she was a nursery nurse for Bernardo's, and it's now turned into apartments. But
you see, she was a nursery nurse, and I think at the nursery level, all the stories I had at the nursery level, they had it was wonderful. It's when they get older and they have to go to, in Dr. Bernardo's, another part of it or another home, if it's just a nursery. Yeah. It's then it starts being more problematic. But I've heard really good things about the nurseries. Yeah, that's great. It's great, interesting. Yes, do find out more. Thank you very much.
I'll have to get the book for her. I'm sure she'd be really interested to read it.
Yeah, it's coming out in paperback. I mean, it's coming out
September.
Yeah.
I've just seen it. I've just looked it up. I was looking while you were speaking.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That's really helpful and a very personal connection there. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to make a comment or add anything to Lucy. Yes, Martin?
You're on mute, Martin.
Yes, I'm off mute. Just to offer Professor Bland, if you need context for any future research or articles, I was brought up in Lancashire, one of the places she said there was a concentration of black military people. And the little town I lived in was very close to a place called Burton Wood, which was the biggest airport, inward airport for things being brought across across the Atlantic. So to give you an idea, I've got one friend from Warrington. Sadly, he's died now, and 4 of his sisters married GIs. 4 of his sisters. So it showed there was quite a few pubs or dance halls in Warrington where I was brought up. But maybe they were white children rather than brown, but who knows? So if Professor Bland needs any context up there, because also there was an American military hospital in the site of my grandmother's house where I lived. They played at the golf club in Warrington, and the American servicemen left a sundial to the golf club. So I've got some local context there if Professor Bland ever needs them in Warrington.
Well, that's fantastic. Were they there? Did it carry on after the war? Because of course, you know, some of the bases carried on, and certainly with the Cold War from '47.
No, the Burton Wood carried on because it was crucial for the Berlin airlift.
Yes, so obviously it's carrying on. Okay.
As a young boy in my grandmother's garden, I became an plane spotter, because there were all sorts of American planes circulating above, waiting to land at Burton Wood, and we had a Fleet Air Arm place as well. So yes, the Americans stayed on for quite a time. In fact, my friend, I'm ashamed to mention this, but you know, I think in memory one can. He was quite active in the black market because he was a Warrington boy and knew all these officers at the Burton Wood camp who had nylons or cigarettes or whatever.
Yeah.
So he did a bit of it launched his entrepreneurial career in Warrington.
So he was a spiv.
Yeah. He then did national service and married a German girl. So again, this service local girl connection continued. So his wife, Crystal, who came from Germany, brought up a son in Warrington. And he then went to Cambridge and did very well in life and the academic world. So there were lots of contacts. But I'm now in London, so I'm not super connected there, but there's local newspapers. I've got a niece who's a journalist and that sort of thing.
Martin, that's really interesting because, I mean, one thing that Shamin, who runs the mixed race, the mixed museum, we both want to, if we're going to get some grant money, we want to sort of set up links across the country with various local groups, sort of museums or local history groups in areas where they had Black GI stationed, because we want to link up where all the children were born with that. So we want to do a mapping. So we want to put up a kind of map. So, you know, because I've been a bit useless about thinking about this, but certainly, I mean, I know that Warrington and Burton Wood was a crucial place, but like that would be great. So Martin, can you give me your email address?
What I'll do, Lucy, I can just link both of you together afterwards, all right? Through email.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you.
If not, Martin, I'll put it on the chat.
Fine. I'll just add one last point. Also in Lancashire, Preston was close to some Black GIs because there was a racial spat between local people or white British soldiers and American Black GIs near Preston. It's called the Battle of Bamber Bridge.
Yes, famous.
Yes. And I've got also contacts in Preston, if that helps. So we can
great.
By email. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Martin. You're always a fount of links, right? If you can have such a thing, right? Yeah. Thank you ever so much, then, Lucy, Professor Bland. Thank you so much. It certainly opened our eyes, and we'll share with other people the story of the brown babies. It's another difficult story in the range of difficult stories we tell. Now, this past week, it was a recognition of Windrush Day, and I think we'll talk about that again when we've reviewed what sort of things happened for Windrush Day this year. From my point of view, it seems to be very much being focused on the Caribbean communities, if you like, who were the perhaps relatives of Windrush. And the conference that we did on Sunday, which I've shared the link, and I can share it again if anybody wants. That certainly started the exploration, which had started on these sessions with Dr. Robertson-Hickling, because the more that we're exploring what happened to people who were left behind, really the more distressing it is to hear about the family disruption and the hardship that was suffered by those communities who put together to get the funding for the people on the Windrush. So we'll follow that one up again. It's going to be an ongoing story in our research. But what I'd like to do, having thanked you, Lucy, is to ask Bumni. Now, because my geography, as you'll suddenly discover in a moment, is absolutely appalling, Bumni is over in Canada, so I asked Bumni if she'd mind telling us a story about, oh dear, the story about the 1921 attack on Greenwood, Blackwall Street, which is in Tulsa, and this is the States, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But because Bumni's brilliant, she said yes, she would research it, because I think Bumni, have you done one of your Sankofa Pan-African series sessions on it? Bumni, you take your mute off.
I have an episode on the
Black. Why I linked. It wasn't because I thought that it was in Canada. Right. Okay. Over to you then, Dr. Bumni Oyinsan, who leads the regular postings on Pan-African, the Sankofa Pan-African series that are absolutely fantastic. You've got such a great following, and we really appreciate that you join us as well. And I know some of the sessions we've done, speakers have also come and helped you to prepare one of your episodes. So over to you, Bumni. We want to know more about this really traumatic attack that was celebrated for being 100 years ago, I think now.
Yes, it was 100 years ago in May, last month.
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, okay. So on the 30th of May, 1921, 19-year-old Rick Rowland went to the Drexel building in Tulsa to use the restroom. Tulsa was a segregated city, and so he had to go there to use the bathroom. On getting to the building, he needed to take an elevator to reach the colored restroom on the 3rd floor. Unfortunately for him, a 17-year-old girl, Sarah Page, who was white, was already in the elevator. 1921 was only about 56 years after the United States abolished slavery. As such, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the Black people lived, was almost an anomaly because it had grown into an astonishingly prosperous neighborhood. At that time, in other parts of America, Black people were still being forced to live under very harsh conditions. In the South and Midwest especially, the sharecropping system continued to keep Black people under the same conditions they were during slavery. They continued to toil on land owned by their former white owners, at the end of which they had to surrender the largest chunks of their crops to the white landlords, who also found various other ways of keeping them trapped in debt. The Black people who were determined to improve their lots did so, facing the constant threat of violence, such as lynching. So in 1921, the population of Greenwood was made up of Black people who had migrated there from the South in search of better conditions of living, which was elusive to them elsewhere, especially in the South. And some of the Black people who settled in Greenwood were veterans from World War One. And there were people who were eager to start lives in the country they had helped to defend. Before most of them settled in the area north of the city of Greenwood, the Black population had tried to settle in Langston, also in Oklahoma, but they were driven out of Langston by racist white people. From Langston, they landed in Tulsa, and in spite of the strict Jim Crow segregation laws of the city, and despite only constituting about 12% of the population of Tulsa, Black people in Greenwood succeeded in establishing a vibrant and prosperous district. At the time, the state of Oklahoma and Tulsa in particular was quite prosperous due to the growing oil industry, which allowed most of the people of the town to grow rich. Being rich meant they needed to hire Black people from nearby Greenwood to work not only as domestics, but in other capacities needed by the booming economy of Tulsa. These economic opportunities allowed the Black people to invest in their communities and start their own business. Some historians like James Hershey have pointed out how opulent life was for the Black people of Greenwood, who lived in well-built brick houses that were sometimes furnished with Louis XIV furniture, fine china, and Steinway pianos. They established their own newspapers, cafes, stores, theaters, hotels, and professional offices. The district soon became known as the Black Wall Street. Some even called it Little Africa. They were not allowed downtown, but they had carved out a district which must have aroused the envy of the white population, who did not welcome them downtown except when they were there for work, and who, as we now know, were only waiting for an excuse to destroy them. So what happened in the elevator at the Drexel building that day when Dick Rowland stepped into it? Well, it's hard to say. Some observers say that the elevator was faulty and that it never stopped on the third floor, as the girl who said she was assaulted claimed. Others speculate that Dick Rowland must have tripped and, in an attempt to prevent a fall, stepped on the girl's toes. Some even believe that the two young people knew each other and that whatever happened between them in the elevator could simply have been a tiff between two young people. Whatever it was, Sarah Page, the young white girl that was in the elevator with Dick Rowland, reported to the police that he assaulted her, and news about the assault spread like wildfire, gaining momentum in much the same way as fire. Rumors saying that someone saw Dick Rowland running out of the elevator grew wings. Others said the girl's dress was ripped. Others still said she was raped. By the following day, jungle justice was fully in motion. Dick Rowland, who had been arrested, was taken by a mob of armed, angry white men to the courthouse. The intentions of the mob was to lynch him. However, they reckoned without the community in Greenwood, who turned up to protect the young man. It's been estimated that about 75 men, some of who were trained World War I combat veterans, turned up. Someone in the white mob fired a gun, and the Black people had to retreat when other shots followed. They were forced to retreat, and they went back to Greenwood to secure their community. The white vigilantes saw this as an opportunity to lay siege on their community. The community was soon overwhelmed because the white vigilantes, who were better armed, quickly outnumbered them. Also, heavily armed, angry white mobs from neighboring cities, as well as the police, joined them. They put up a machine gun and directed it into a church where they knew people had gone to take refuge. Some rode around the city in cars, firing through windows. They went into homes and dragged them out to shoot on the street, or dragged them tied to the back of cars around for display through the town. They smashed windows and kicked in doors to loot jewelry, fur, and their valuable. They even brought in planes that flew menacingly over the Black community, shooting down dynamite at buildings, destroying homes and workplaces, shops, and even funeral homes. They continued this frenzied spree of destruction until the next afternoon, when the Oklahoma National Guard arrived and proclaimed martial law. Unfortunately, it was too late for thousands of Black people who had now become homeless as a result of the wanton destruction of lives and property. Hundreds of Black people lost their lives, with millions lost as a result, millions of dollars lost as a result of the carnage. The National Guard chose to believe the police, who lied that there had been a Negro uprising. 6,000 Greenwood residents were arrested and detained for a week. Upon release, with nowhere else to go, many were forced to join the rest of the homeless, living in Red Cross tents. As a result of the carnage, not only was Greenwood rendered uninhabitable, all effort to rebuild it was resisted. Instead, there were attempts to relocate the residents farther away, but they resisted, and many tried to take the case to court. Over 100 suits were filed. However, the judicial system failed them. A sham grand jury, which was set up to investigate the incident, ended up blaming the Black people for inciting race riots while exonerating the white people. Unsurprisingly, the white girl who started it all did not even show up to testify against Dick Rowland in court. Thankfully, the case against him was dropped. And unfortunately, those who tried to rebuild this remarkable community found their progress slowed down by lack of access to funds and the new zoning laws that prohibited them from rebuilding. Even those who had insured their homes and properties were ripped off by insurance companies who claimed that their policies did not cover riots. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much indeed. Yet another incredibly salutary story. And a story that I'm sure until the publicity that was given, certainly on our television, of the 100 years anniversary, was probably unknown to most people.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, the research you do and the work you put into your Sankofa Pan-African series is absolutely remarkable. For me, it's just fabulous. And there's a Nigerian author. That's your perhaps role that you thought you had before you were in Canada and staying there during COVID. But I know you lived between Nigeria and Canada. So, but your work during the pandemic with the Pan-African, the Sankofa Pan-African series has just been absolutely fantastic. So that's on YouTube, and you can catch one of one or many. I binge watch Bumni's episodes.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, thank you so much. Right. I don't know quite where to start with that, but one of the things that I've realised during these months is that the Black history of the US, and interestingly, Lucy, with your presentation, we were looking at a link between the US and Britain, but the Black history stories of the US are unique to the US, as are the Black history stories of any other country unique to that particular country, and combination of shared histories. And I think that's important because in the UK, we just lifted the model of Black History Month from America and tried to impose it, or use it usefully in the UK. But part of the Black history of the US, I think, is absolutely encapsulated in this particular story, because obviously, well, not obviously, but late emancipation in the US. So, and Black people in the South living amongst the well, to begin with, they would have been living amongst living people who had been slave owners, but then certainly living with the descendants of, within the communities, within the descendants of slave owners who had never accepted emancipation. I'm telling you all, and you know all this anyway, but it's me trying to get the words right to be able to explain it. But the stories of the lynching and the Ku Klux Klan and all the other active discrimination and all the years of campaigning for rights for Black people does make the American story very different. And while we've been looking in the UK at recognising the Windrush story, and with Lucy's help looking at that story of the brown babies, they're different stories. But Britain has an enormous shared history with all the countries that were colonised, including America and including Australia. But here in Australia, the Australian government's busy trying to do reconciliation and worrying about apologies for the stolen generation. That's another story that, goes along at these same times. It almost gets overwhelming when you realise just what a shameful history Britain has got. And that we need to understand these stories. So I really appreciate, Bumni, that you so clearly told that story, from the little incident that might never have even been an incident that was then used as an excuse, and then the horrifying level of hatred that was unleashed against that community. Just an amazing story. So any other comments? Lucy, no questions.
Yeah, so of course Trump very provocatively insisted on having a rally, didn't he, in Tulsa? And he knew, he must have known, the significance of doing that. It was just, it seems to be that there's this kind of moments when Black communities come up and empower themselves. There's a book which you may know, We Were 8 Years in Power, by Ta-Nehisi Coates, American, Black American.
Oh, yeah, I know it.
Yeah. But, he's, the 8 years is about the 8 years after the Civil War, and there was a time, but it's also the 8 years of Obama. Like there's moments, which are then taken away, because, which is, it's just so appalling, because I think that white supremacy is still alive and kicking in the States. I mean, we have it in this country, but in Britain, but not anything like the same extent, I would say. Not that, Britain's not racist, it is, but that sort of visceral hatred is really terrifying. And I think, that you saw it in when they attacked the Congress, that extraordinary.
Yes.
I think it's possibly, I don't know, those of other people who are British, we know that we've had a series of very right-wing organisations which do have a lot of hatred, but I don't know if they're not anything on the same scale, are they? Would other people agree? I don't know.
No, we have had race riots in the UK, and we're beginning to explore those stories, but certainly nothing on this scale. And Annette, I don't know if you want to come in, or
just to say, sorry, race riots. We've had race riots we've had a lot of race riots in Britain. In 1919, we had race riots in 9 ports and around Britain, and then we've had these uprisings. But yes, it's always not quite the same.
Annette, is there anything that you would like to? Annette, you need to unmute yourself, Annette.
Okay, sorry about that. I said, I've been listening to everything that's been said, and it's really been, you know, a wonderful talk today regarding the brown babies. I knew something about that, but it was really, you know, to get a full breakdown of where it started, how it went. I knew about the GIs and the babies that, you know, were left behind. But going to America, if you have a president who has no respect for anyone but himself, and he doesn't even have that, you know, you know, the people followed him, and people who he sort of given the authority, they make them feel as if now they can do or say anything about other people and treat other people in a way which is very condescending. They're not important because obviously, you know, they have a leader who's willing to lead them. And these people were on the fringes, but now they've been brought into the fold. And therefore they feel that they have the authority because they've got the backing. They did have the backing of their president to do that in America. So, you know, the Tulsa one, when he said that they're good people on both sides when they were having these long weapons and all of those sort of things. So, you know, and as you can see, even in the Senate, I mean, you know, the riot, you know, on the 6th of January, I mean, and it was appalling. Their life was on the line. They're wanting to hang their vice president, and still the people who are in the Senate are supporting, you know, saying it didn't happen. That wasn't what you saw with your own eyes. And it's the same thing going back to that young man who knows what may have happened in that elevator. But I would have thought that, knowing the feeling of, you know, segregation in America, it was most unlikely that that black guy was going to attack in a public place, in an elevator. I mean, you know, it was just an excuse for you know, causing mayhem and give them a reason to do what they did. But they always have a leader. They always have to have someone who sparked these things, and people follow, unfortunately. You know, they don't, it's just how things have been over the years, which is quite painful, because people are people and we should treat each other as we would like to be treated. And really, that's what I have to say about
Annette, thank you, and it's lovely to have you joining us now. That's really, really
kind. Can I quickly say something, following up on what Annette said? Yeah, you know, that statement that people are people is just so, you know, that's so profound, because the only photographs of this boy, this Dick Rowland, that I found, I initially couldn't use them because I thought there was a mistake. He looked white. He's someone who could have easily passed for white. And so I'm actually inclined to believe that whatever happened in that elevator was a tip between two young people, you know, and that this madness of classifying people by race, you know, it's just insane. And the kind of violence that it unleashed, it just doesn't make sense at all. It just doesn't make sense that human beings would go to that length, you know, just to destroy other people just based on, you know, but that's the crazy world we live in.
Thank you very much, Bumni. And Professor Satie, you're going to have to unmute yourself. We've got the problem with the sound again.
What of now?
Thank you, perfect.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The point I want to make is to really look at how societies, other orders, they stigmatize others, and then they stigmatize people. White society or Europeans, when they came to Africa, one of the things they complained about us or labeled us was that we were liars. We don't tell the truth. And here in this elevator story, it is very difficult to see how white people are telling the truth. And so people can be labeled in a derogatory manner, while that same characteristic can be found in all other societies at their own convenience. And it's so annoying, but like the comment I posted, the stories that Bumi gave and Lucy gave are very sad stories, very difficult stories, but they're the hard realities of the times people found themselves. It's just incumbent on us as modern day human beings to return to that philosophy that we are all human beings, and the Trump doctrine, the racist doctrine needs to be toned down, and people should be honest to own up to the wrong things that they have done, and not use the opportunities of the fact that they can be believed regardless of what they say to punish others.
I unmuted myself, Professor Satie, because I was laughing so much when you said about white people not being liars. Goodness gracious me. I think lying to ourselves has been the worst thing, pretending we were great when we were around the world, invading more countries than I even know the names of. Oh gosh, right. Well, I'm really pleased to say that thank you very much, Professor Satie, for that. Thank you, Bumni, for your contribution there. I really, really appreciate the fact. I felt that we did need to take that opportunity of that anniversary and to recognise that story and respect the hardships, terrible hardships of that community, and the ongoing damage, no doubt. But I'm delighted to say that Dr. Hilary Robertson-Hickling's joined us now from up in the hills above Kingston, Jamaica. And Hilary, it's wonderful to see you again. And thank you very much for joining us on Sunday for our Windrush conference. And we're going to continue. Dr. Robertson-Hickling, Hilary has been kind enough to join us on a number of occasions, and you're going to continue to share the exploration of the results of the Windrush departure and also the years of family disruption. That's what I'd written down. So over to you, Hilary, to share whatever you'd like to with us today. Thank you very much indeed.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I have been giving further thought to the discussions, and indeed we seem to be at a moment in history where there's a convergence of a number of issues, and so I wanted to follow up on the idea that is on Sunday, that this Odyssey, like Homer's Odyssey, is still in progress. And so I use the name and the experience of the young cellist in Britain, whose passport and therefore whose citizenship and identity and all those kinds of things were removed, withdrawn, in spite of him being born in Nottingham, England. And the matter of who people are and where they belong then continues to be a matter. In other words, where are you really from is the question. So being born in Nottingham doesn't mean that you are a British citizen. And so this long journey, and in fact, I was reading something else and talked about the sirens that Homer saw on his journey and how these rocks are there so that the sirens are there to attract people into trouble. And I wonder if some of the discussions that we're having, and I heard just a part of one of the discussions, is that the way in which people are using the opportunities to create mayhem. I think I was reading recently, maybe this morning, that there's a report that has come out which has tried to impose or include the issue of white working class education in Britain under the current Tory government to talk about, what is the word now? To distract from or gaslight, whichever one of the words is most appropriate, to the things that are happening in Britain. So in other words, it isn't about Black Lives Matter, it is about white working class education. And no doubt there are many problems. However, we realize that the populists are digging deep in the vein of it's the dark foreigners' fault. So while that is going on in Britain, I think that perhaps we are consumed here in a place like Jamaica. I'm not even sure that many people understand what it means for 73 years later, this Windrush group, and it's the people who they have produced, what their absence has meant and what their presence could have meant. And so there are, I think, a number of unresolved issues. There are also issues that people don't even realize are issues, because I am aware of communities in Jamaica where one person in a family went and several other family members went, and other people in the community went, and then they went to Britain and they went, let us say, Coventry or Wolverhampton or North London or wherever. So we actually have a space, a gap, a hole in which there is a lot of stuff which is hanging. And of course, the people have gone to this new, well, it can't be so new after 73 years, but we're saying maybe 4 generations. What has happened to those people who have gone to these cities in Britain? So I saw, for example, that I think her name is it Pauline or Paulette? Pauline.
Paulette Wilson.
Paulette Wilson, who at 64, younger than I am, she has represented a kind of metaphor, an example of a human being who has gotten caught in this terrible vortex in Britain, and recognizing that her family in Jamaica, and it must exist, that they are probably not even sure or understanding what happened to her in Wolverhampton. And I was intrigued to see that the plaque was placed at the office where Enoch Powell used to be. And so the question I want us to think about, how do we acknowledge and recognize the past, and where wrongs have been committed, how do we repair them through the processes of reparation? I think I want to stop there.
Hilary, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think as we talk more about this, then we're beginning to see things and explore ways that we can understand better. I was fascinated. I'm on the Facebook page of the last Jamaican High Commissioner, Aluna Samba Nobet, and she just posted a comment about Windrush. And gosh, Hilary, I don't know if you read those responses, but there was some really, oh dear, my heart just went cold to realise that the challenges. And I think there's a whole lot more, certainly, that white English people need to know and understand about this. Sadly, Paulette Wilson has now passed, but there is a YouTube film where actually she was given the opportunity to return to Jamaica and I need to watch it again based on what I know now. But yes, that was the most awful situation. But you know, the signs aren't hopeful in the UK that the government's taking really any notice. And I was really distressed that I didn't get to hear about Windrush Day funding, and yet I've been a campaigner in Wales to do things for years now, and things that we've done have been shown as models to other communities of things that they could do. But I didn't even hear about the funding until about 10 days before Windrush Day. So I'm very grateful that you and others supported a conference about Windrush, because I think that we need to put this into a position where we're discussing it. We seem to spend the first few years after Windrush actually trying to find out what the stories were, so we had any idea what was being talked about. But now I think things are moving on. And Yasser Safari, who joins us sometimes, a Jamaican poet and philosopher, and he's determined with friends to put some sort of memorial on the docks in Kingston to recognise when the Empire Windrush left. And what was it he said on Sunday? He said it shouldn't be called the Empire Windrush, it should be called the colonializing or something Empire Windrush. I can't remember what he said now. But yes, that's so fascinating. Right, over to any of the rest of you then to follow up on Hilary's reflections. Annette, what did you do with Windrush Day this year? Do you? Annette, you're muted. Thank you.
For Windrush Day this year, we did a filming of a thanks and praise service for our community, because of course celebrating their contributions to the UK, and for them to be remembered. You know, because as we know, history can be hidden. So we wanted to ensure that we've had something that was recorded and that we can keep for prosperity. This recording was a live recording by Zoom. We did that. The Church of God of Prophecy did this recording for us, and this is going to be going out at hopefully at this weekend, or if not next weekend, because we were planning to have an in-person service, but of course when the government said the lockdown wasn't going to be eased on the 11th, when they mentioned that, we had to quickly try and do something for, you know, Windrush Day. But in Reading, we also had a link up with a school in Barbados and schools in England, where the children did a play and so forth. And there are more things that are going to be coming out later on in the year, because we just could not fit, because of the time limit that we have, the limited time. We weren't able to get everything out there, but that was broadcast. And if you look on the website for the Reading Museum website, there will be something on there about Windrush Day.
All right, thank you very much indeed. And I think that's a really good point that you've just made, Annette, because having a day for Windrush means that everybody's trying to do everything on the same day, or the weekend before, or the weekend after. And then if you're involved in doing all those things, you can't see what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely.
I think at the moment, I think the Caribbean communities are busy doing things. And yet it's the civil service officials that need the attention and activity. They're the ones who need to be educated, because many folks nowadays who live and work in the UK, well, most folks haven't had a very good history experience of learning about history in schools. So if in fact they were educated in the UK at all, I mean, we are such mixed communities now, and people possibly genuinely didn't know what they were up to, didn't know the stories of Windrush. So I do think it's really important. So it's really interesting to hear what you're doing. So please do send me the link to that, and we're going to create this resource, Unlocking Black History. So that'll be useful too. Okay. Thank you ever so much, Annette.
You're welcome. Okay. I will send you that link
Thank you.
after the meeting.
Now, I'm just going to do a little check round, Hilary, so that you know. So, Gwyneth, were you up to anything to do with Windrush in Denbigh?
No, I'm afraid we weren't. No, didn't do anything.
Okay.
But I do think there is a meanness about UK governments. If you look at the those who suffered with because of haemophilia, many countries have given compensation, but the UK government is still dragging its feet. So I don't think there is a generosity in UK governments.
Well, I think that's really interesting, Gwyneth, because even what I've read in the papers over here, or what I can read online, that a very low number of people who are eligible for compensation have been able to get through the system, and there's ongoing awful stories. So we're nowhere near through this yet. It's as if, you know, oh gosh, we realised there was a problem. Let's put it right. It's just going on. So,
yeah. Before then, it was asbestos. So it goes on. So the Windrush.
So all those sort of health conditions as well. Yes, yes. Yeah. Helen, I don't know if you're there and around and want to add anything, or anyone else, or if I'll say thank you very much, Helen.
No, I have nothing else to add. It's been really interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, then it's been good. So did you come across any footage on the main TV about Windrush Day or anything? People have said to me it was very quiet this year.
Nothing.
Nothing, because people couldn't get out and about and do things perhaps or didn't want to this year. So thank you for that, Helen. Right, okay, Cora, did you get to hear anything about Windrush Day, or Joan Robinson? Cora?
Not really, obviously, but I'm in a choir, and we actually did sing and was aware of the day, and we did sing some peace songs, actually. That's about all we did, really, but it was nice, you know.
Acknowledgement, and that's all we want, really. Yeah. And I noticed that churches are going to telling these stories. So Joan, I don't know if you're there.
I'm the same.
Right. Okay, you've switched your sound off. You're mute now, Joan.
We're part of this, and I are part of the same organization.
All right.
So whatever Annette has done is what I've done, is what we've done.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a very interesting session. Hilary, is there anything that you want to add from your perspective?
Well, I just want to encourage all of us to keep sane. These are very hard times.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to switch the recording off now, say thanks, and then we can just catch up with the chat after. Thank you.